All right, I say we get started here. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Evaluating Data Management Software for Life Science Research. Thank you so much for attending today or listening in afterward. My name is Bernie Lee, and in addition to being your host, I am a product manager here at LabKey Software. Today, I'm going to walk you through some of the important lessons that we here at LabKey have learned from 20 years of solving data management problems for a wide variety of research organizations. Our agenda today includes preparing for a new system so that you can be successful, defining your requirements, functional and business and otherwise, actually evaluating solutions, and some important points around working with vendors. Through this presentation, I'm going to ask all of you to respond to one poll for fun, and I'll invite you to submit questions as they arise, please, in the Q&A. And at the end of this, I will make time for as many questions as are asked. So thank you so much again. So, who are we? As you can see from this outline, this sketch, we have been solving data management challenges for people, for scientists, for many, many years. We got our official start with proteomics data, but quickly expanded to other types of data and other research types entirely. Those have included, this is certainly a non-exhaustive list, HIV/AIDS research, clinical trial and other kind of clinical research, research network data centralization, large molecule biologics development, sample tracking, and much more. Each of these challenges are unique in what they need, and we have successfully served many with these challenges. And just in case we're not all on exactly the same page, what do we mean when we say data management software? Well, that's really any software that helps you organize, integrate, maintain, track, explore, connect, and analyze data. You all can probably think of a few more verbs to add to that list, and you'd probably be correct. The point here is that there can be many different aspects to data management, each of which are valid. I've listed here a few examples of data management software types, which you can probably find a variety of definitions for across the internet. But to choose a few, to boil it down a little bit, an SDMS, a scientific data management system, is something that helps you integrate data from multiple sources. Sample management software helps you track and manage the life cycle of samples, of course. There are LIMS, laboratory information management systems, that help you capture data throughout your workflows and your experiments. ELNs, electronic laboratory notebooks. Today, these take kind of a variety of forms, but in addition to facilitating the documentation of your work, which is of course a critical facet of scientific research, it helps you organize unstructured information as well as sometimes structured information. And analytics software provides means to interrogate your data to answer questions you have about it. Now, obviously, this is a non-exhaustive list, and many products out there will overlap more than one of these definitions, but hopefully gets us a little bit more on the same page. So, it's poll time. You all are here for a reason, and given our new shared understanding of what some of these tools are, please tell me, what type of data management system do you see you and your organization evaluating in the near future? Don't worry if you're unsure, I won't take this as any kind of commitment. And yes, in fact, you can select multiple options on this poll if that's accurate. And in a little while, I'll share these results with everyone. Thank you for your participation. All right, so let's jump in. First up, we have preparing for a new system. Preparing so that you are successful. I'm starting with this for some really good reasons. Investment in data architecture is long-term. A system could be in place for 5 years, 10 years, maybe even longer. We in fact have clients with a longer tenure than that. So not only will it be around for a really long time, the data management environment that you're in heavily influences your perspective on what's possible informatically, as well as when considering changes in the future. So making a choice that's problematic for you or your collaborators now can, in the long run, actually make things worse instead of better. So how to make sure you're prepared. Engage stakeholders at all levels throughout the whole evaluation. Don't take your foot off the gas pedal when it comes to this. Make sure you understand who will use the system and to what end. Is it everyone at the organization? Is it for one isolated team? Either of those and everything in between is okay, but gather the relevant team leaders and start getting aligned. Talk about how data flows between people and teams now and how that might be improved. What are your pain points when it comes to communication and requests and passing data around? Do all of you need to see all of the data all the time or not? Do you all need the data in the same format? What peripheral tools do various team members need to have supported or replaced? We also, of course, need to consider how to deal with the potential for conflict between teams. No system is going to fit everyone perfectly. What expectations for data capture, data sharing should be established? Who will communicate and how between teams? What compromises can be made to establish functional relationships between those teams and prioritize the most important things? And of course, you might not be able to conceive of making big changes for everyone across your whole organization at once. I would, in fact, be surprised if you could. So if you had to start your implementation, start your problem solving in one area, make improvements, show the value, and then expand, how would you make that choice? You know, we certainly find that trying to line absolutely everything up for hundreds of people or even dozens of people is extremely difficult to do up front. So we always recommend a progressive institutional rollout until the benefit is seen. That is key. Then I implore you, consider change management. Prepare for change. We're talking about implementing potentially significant change on maybe everyone. This can be disruptive. Humans are not known for our eagerness to change, though we are in reality highly adaptable creatures. Just takes the right incentives. So imposing new modes of work is always challenging, and it is in fact those incentives and or enforcement that we need to figure out what incentives will be required and at what level in order to get everyone using the system as intended. At your organization, it may simply need to be announced that this is how it's going to work. We're using this new tool. Give it a try. There will be trainings, and everyone will just kind of make use of it. At others, and I'm not saying this speculatively, business executives might need to mandate usage and build incentives into pay or bonus structure. This can be kind of a big deal. Please spend some time contemplating this one. You may actually be surprised where you get some pushback. Okay, then determine and document your goals and your functional requirements. Okay, so you have consulted your people and clarified the benefits to each of them doing this. You have a list of efficiency gains and functional needs, and you are now quite sure that your people know how to dream really, really big. Great. This is not enough, it turns out. There is not going to be an off-the-shelf system that's a perfect fit unless maybe you have very, very, very simple needs. So it's time to rank order your requirements. What are the absolutely critical pieces and where is there room for some compromise? Document those facts. What do you want to accomplish? For whom? Why are you doing this specifically? What is painful about this particular process or this particular facet of your operation? And why does it need to be ameliorated? If you cannot explain why something is time consuming or difficult now, if you cannot explain why you're doing this whole thing succinctly internally, it's going to be very difficult as you start talking to vendors for them to help you be successful, because they also won't understand exactly what you need. And this is key. Determine these requirements up front. Having your requirements crop up when you're months in, 90% through making a decision, can completely derail the work that you have done. Some requirements preempt or totally interdict your processes. And so it is very important to understand these things up front. It's also important to have this clear, because as you begin to understand the products and offerings that are out there, you will be presented with missing pieces in those products and notable trade-offs. If you have to wrestle with each one of those in the absence of a clear vision and what you can compromise on and what you can't, it will be a profoundly frustrating experience and a very time-consuming endeavor. So again, rank order your requirements based on operational needs and current pain points. I recommend writing them all down exhaustively, and then working to align across teams. You can always deprioritize requirements. It's better not to forget something. So here are just a couple of examples to consider. There's standardization. If anyone is going to use your data in the future, whether that's you or someone else, it's very helpful to have it in a predictable and consistent form. And this is certainly true if you plan to make use of any kind of informatics. What type of data needs to be supported, and what do you need to do with the data afterward? How does everyone need to access this data? Are they just looking at what others have entered? Are they viewing reports or exports, pulling data into other software? Do they need to view the data in a combined way or separated? Each type of data seen in isolation. What type of analyses need to be performed? And then there's security and compliance, which I'll certainly spend a little bit more time on later on. But are you working with human subject data? Are you working with a partner on a grant with specific data sharing requirements? Are you on a Department of Defense contract playing with neurotoxins? What are the implications for security and for your situation specifically? Then there's integrations. What other types of software need to interact? Do you use or plan to use other databases, electronic data capture tools, electronic laboratory notebooks, analytics systems? There's a lot of software that contributes to a data architecture and informatics environment. That's what I just listed is a lot, but you are guaranteed to come up with more. So write them down. And okay, let's round out this section by talking about new data and old data. Plan for new and legacy data. Okay, so based on learnings from your stakeholders, probably of multiple conversations, what should you do with the data you already have? Ask yourself exactly how you will use that older data and how frequently. If that old data is interrogated once a quarter, once a year, maybe you can just retrieve it on an ad hoc basis. However, if it's a critical part of current analyses, it's going to need to be integrated with the new data. If you need the old data integrated, it's time at the beginning to start gauging the cleanup effort. How will new data in the new system differ from the old? Obviously, that will depend on the software solution you're considering. Should all of the existing data be migrated, or just last year or 2 years or 10 years worth? Who will spend time completely cleaning up or reformatting existing data? It can require a lot of time and resources. How many people and for how long? And perhaps a really important question, if you find yourself answering a lot of these questions with, yeah, there's a lot to do in this space, is there something that a vendor can help you with? You should ask them. Very often they can. From the initial implementation onward, when will each team's data go into the new system? Are there dependencies on one team from another? This, of course, matters because it determines when that legacy data cleanup and migration can begin? When can each group cut over? And when can they start cleaning up and migrating their data? All right. Next, we're going to broaden scope a little bit to include regulatory and business compliance. We'll talk a little bit about technical capacity and requirements, and I will emphasize scalability and growth. All right, let's dive a little deeper into the regulatory and business compliance needs. So this is something that can be sticky if you don't have people internally that understand this stuff clearly and can help you lay out your requirements and evaluate whether a vendor actually provides for them. So some really basic stuff. Do you need data to be partitioned? Access controlled internally, as in some people can see some things at your company and some people can't. Certainly access controlled externally. And at what granularity internally do you need the kinds of roles and permissions on your data? Now, some of you are probably thinking, why wouldn't I want everyone in my group to have access to everything? You're the lucky ones. And I really can't say that that's the most common use case. But again, you're the lucky ones. Then there's more based on your business and regulatory compliance needs. How detailed does auditing of actions in the software need to be? Is it okay for you to simply have enough auditing that you trust the system and you can just proceed? Or do you need to regularly report on exactly who accessed what? These are big differences between an open research environment and, say, a biologics manufacturing environment or a human subject research environment. There are also wide ranges for how free a user may be to put certain types of data in certain places. How strictly do you need such things enforced, controlled, validated? Not only is that relevant for the type of research you're doing, but of course, these are also the types of things that help keep your data clean, consistent, and usable downstream. Then, of course, the software you use does not exist in a vacuum. It exists in some kind of security environment. Some of those conditions meet particular regulatory requirements, and others don't. Some will meet institutional policy standards, some will not. What do you need? How do you know? Do you have the support? Do you have the staff to support each of these particular needs imposed on you either by your institution, by the government, by grants, by whatever it is? And can you clearly describe what you need to a vendor so that they can provide you with a simple answer as to whether or not they can support it? To offer a quick example, is it okay for software you use that contains your data to be in the cloud somewhere? Or does it need to be on local hardware? Is it okay for the vendor to manage that cloud environment? Or is that something that your staff must do? Simple question, but important to know the answer. And that leads us to technical capacity and requirements. How much IT support do you have? If you need to run the software from your own local hardware, let's say, you have a server room somewhere on your campus, do you or those internal support teams have the knowledge and the bandwidth to actually support some new piece of software? Often they do have the knowledge, they don't have the bandwidth, or sometimes they do have the bandwidth, they don't have the knowledge. It's important to know these things. If you are okay with the software being in the cloud, does your IT team have any specific requirements about the way that it is hosted in, say, AWS? In theory, of course, you have engaged with this team at the very beginning, and you know all these things. But of course, this is important since not all vendors are nimble enough to meet you exactly where you are. Not all vendors offer a cloud solution, or not all vendors will allow you to host your own software on local hardware. Can the vendors that you are talking to meet you where you are or where you're headed? Maybe you're trying to move everything up into the cloud, for instance. is this software going to connect to anything else in your information architecture, or is it totally standalone? Do you have a software development team? Those are often actually the same question, asked two different ways. What does it need to connect to and how? What future plans does your software development team have? And what is needed to accommodate them? Is this system replacing something? Will there need to be a migration of some kind? Do those systems have to work concurrently for some period of time? And who is doing what? What do you need the vendor to do? What do you need, your engineers to do? What are you as users going to do? Got to figure these things out. And then there are other types of technical teams, like data science and bioinformatics teams. They, of course, like to access data programmatically. They like to build pipelines to such systems or connect up ones that already exist. What do those teams need? What languages do they need APIs for? Once you are moving data between systems, which these groups like to do, it becomes increasingly difficult to determine which one is the source of truth for that data. Make sure those expectations and decisions are deliberated upon, documented, and then communicated clearly. This can be really important. And another thing to consider, is it okay with you for your solution to be multiple distinct pieces of software, or are you seeking a unified and integrated system? Now, this often arises in the software vendor space when one company acquires another, and then they have more than one piece of software, which they will sometimes bundle up and offer to you as a solution. You're going to find both options out there, and you'll have to analyze the impact of that particular trade-off. Okay, this brings us to the future, or at least farther into the future than we've been discussing. How many people and teams are going to be using this particular piece of technology now and at some reasonable time in the future? This is important because not all software is meant for large groups or concurrent use. And in fact, there may be limits to concurrent users or performance limitations. Are there 5 of you today, but there will be 50 in 2 years? Or maybe that's the wrong scale for you. There's 500 of you today, and there will be 1,000 of you in 2 years. It's also important to know these things because very often pricing is determined this way. Sometimes it's direct, cost per user, and sometimes there's a cost for up to a certain number of users, giving you a little bit of wiggle room as people move on and off of teams or in and out of the company. Other times licenses are priced per group, per project, per institution. Nonetheless, understanding your scale in terms of people and your growth trajectory can have an impact on this, so plan for it. It's also important to have a general understanding of how much data you will generate over time and in what form. Do you have dozens of samples a day, but will have thousands of samples a day or more in the future? And in terms of type, is that simply filling up database tables, or are you also accumulating large files and small files? Make sure this is documented. Some vendors put limitations on these quantities. Others are simply not built to perform above certain scales. If there are limitations and you're generally okay with those limitations, what are you going to consider excluding from the system in order to accommodate those limitations? These are things that you need to know upfront in order to express those needs to the vendors and in order to make a reasoned decision based on what is offered to you. Okay, actually, before we do this next part, let me share our poll results here. Hopefully that is coming through. I can't remember exactly what this looks like from the other side, but it actually looks like we have a surprisingly even distribution of interests here. Lots of people interested in sample management, ELNs, LIMS, SDMSs. Okay, lots of even needs out there. That's fun though. Okay, Again, thanks so much for participating in our little poll. It's always informative to see, what drives people to come and learn about a topic like this. All right, let's talk about evaluating some of these solutions. There are, of course, myriad factors to consider, some of which I've mentioned, but I've chosen the 3 listed here in order to, because they are actually particularly important in your considerations, and things that are not always well understood. So generally, data management software falls into one of 2 categories: being built to purpose or being more adaptable, flexible. Now, this, of course, is a bit of a spectrum. Pieces of software will fall somewhere in the middle, but let's start with built to purpose. Built to purpose software has some advantages, a few of which I've named here. They're clearly scoped to a particular use case, which is really good. It means that they serve that use case very well. It also means very often the implementation of the software is a lot faster because it's constrained. And supporting people who are using it for that purpose is often simpler. There's good support for it, and often there are more resources for it because it's easier to produce that support. However, there are downsides as well. In the same way that it's conversely to it being clearly scoped for a particular use case and easy to use, it does tend to have limited applicability. So if you have high variation in that use case or a lot of other use cases, the built to purpose piece of software might not cover those other use cases. It is constrained and therefore not easily extensible into other scenarios. And in order to support other scenarios, it may require additional pieces of software. When you have a constrained use case or constrained set of use cases, sometimes built to purpose is exactly the way to go, and sometimes you need more flexibility. On the other hand, there's adaptable and flexible software. It of course has broader applicability. If it isn't specifically tailored to one use case, usually that means it's capable of supporting more. It is often extensible, either through user configuration or through the vendor making changes to the software for you. And what that means is you can have a little bit more of a one-stop shop piece of software to support your whole institution, multiple teams. There are trade-offs to that, of course, as well, which is that the more configuration, the more extensibility, the more teams you want to onboard, very often that means longer implementation times. It also means that you need to figure out who's going to be responsible for these sorts of configurations. Now, most vendors will have a plan for that. We train you to do it, or here's how we do it. But it's nonetheless something that has to be figured out. And of course, when you are supporting, when you're trying to support, a wide variety of use cases, it is often harder to support. And especially, we're talking about scientific research here. Like, it's a wonder when things remain consistent for any long period of time. So it can be hard to support that kind of variety. This is actually something that's very difficult to tell when you're looking at a company's website. This may or may not be clear from these sites that are more oriented towards marketing material than perhaps specifically educating you about their software. So how important are some of these trade-offs to you? And if I were you, I would ask about them pretty explicitly. Ease of use is a critical design facet. It's really, in a way, a measure of how well software matches your common workflows. I say common because, again, we're talking about science here. Not everything is routine or repeated. You don't always want the same setup you normally do or the same analysis. So excluding that work, which you cannot predict today, how long will it take to implement a piece of software for your primary use cases? As I said a minute ago, that of course depends on how built to purpose versus adaptable the software is. So a more specific question might be, how much configuration needs to be done in order to support your use case, how much code has to be written and tested for you. How does that change the cost benefit analysis for you? Are you in a hurry? You've got something you have to get going right now? Or is this, a longer rollout investment, a longer term one? Excuse me. Does the vendor have a way to help you understand approximate timeline? Have they never done this for somebody like you? Or is this something they do all the time? That's a really powerful question to ask, because a clear and succinct answer from the vendor suggests good alignment with your use case, as well as good experience bringing users like you on board. The next question is, how long will it take for my users to learn and adapt to this new way of operating? Some software is highly intuitive and others less so. Usually the more built to purpose software is, as I said before, the easier it is to learn, but also the fewer variations it can handle, and vice versa, which can lead to frustration for some of your people. Does your potential vendor provide assistance with the ramp up of your users? That could be documentation, videos, live trainings or recorded trainings, hands-on troubleshooting, and more. You can be sure your people will have questions. You can be sure things will go wrong. Make sure there's a reasonable pathway to answering the questions and solving the problems that arise. And then here is maybe one of the most important questions, revisited in another form. Earlier, I talked about change management, preparation, and incentives. How clearly can you state for internal stakeholders what the benefits are of a new particular piece of software for your data management, and how they outweigh leaving what is likely the low-cost, well-understood, spreadsheet-based system that is in use? Obviously, that's not the only place that you all might be coming from, but just to take a common example. And do the vendors you are considering understand that transition and make the value proposition for switching from those free-form files and spreadsheets clear? This is a question of trade-offs as well. The trade-offs being money, time, security, future utility, dependence on someone outside of your own organization, maintenance costs if you're doing something internally, and many, many more. So it's worth thinking about. We've already touched on this a little in a few other sections, but it's time to be explicit about vendors' experience. So there are lots of newer companies, and there are some more established companies that offer data management solutions, and they can be very different. I'm not going to tell you definitively that older is better or that newer is better. They're going to have different modes of operating, and the software will be oriented differently. They'll each have good reasons for doing what they do, and you are going to have to assess fit. But regardless of their approach, each vendor should be able to demonstrate competence solving problems like the ones you present them with. This is, again, something that is not always clear from what is shown or described on websites that are more for marketing than evaluation. And so you have to assess this through additional means. The strongest case will be made by peer recommendations and references to someone you know and like. Find the solution and vendor appealing. Why? Many vendors will list some of their clients on their site, but that does not mean that the software, the way that they use the software, is exactly the same way that you would. So ask the vendor for referrals that match your use case. The mere fact that someone is willing to give you some of their time to recommend a vendor is a pretty good sign in and of itself. And it's also worth taking the time to get some of your more specific questions answered. Then there's pricing. So obviously, if a vendor is out of your price range, that's one thing. You do, of course, have to know your budget in order to make that determination. Whether you share knowledge of your budget or not, make sure you know it. There are many ways of pricing data management software. Some of them I mentioned earlier. There are things like volume-based pricing, meaning priced for the amount of data you put in, for the number of samples you use, for the number of instruments supported. And there's also the kind that I was talking about before, where things are priced per user or group, organization, or institution. And I'm sure you've heard of others. And if you haven't, and you go exploring data management software, you will find others. It's important to know what will work for you that's offered. How flexible is the vendor when it comes to meeting your needs commercially? Or how flexible are you institutionally when it comes to meeting other companies' needs commercially? If it's not a good fit commercially, but it is a good fit functionally, do not be afraid to push for alternative arrangements with these companies that fit you better. They would love to have you as a client. It is good to find someone that's commercially nimble enough to adapt to you. That's a good sign. And then there's support. What is offered, and how does the attitude of the vendor's representatives suit you? It's a sure thing that you will need help at some point. If the people you have talked to so far are aloof, too busy for you, aren't really listening to what you're saying, or will only send you through an inadequate public support algorithm, is it going to be worth the costs of trying to adopt such a system? On the other hand, maybe they offer a full support team, frequent meetings, on-demand trainings, the works. If you're investing in an enterprise data management solution, shouldn't the support offered instill confidence that you're going to be successful? Yes, it should. But you can imagine if you're switching from a spreadsheet-based system where you are one user in a billion, and now you're considering a data management system where you'll become one of hundreds or thousands doing specialized and important work. Make sure to ask for what you think you will need to be successful. I want to round this out by drilling a few final points about solution vendors. Unless this is kind of your job, like you've helped adopt a lot of software solutions for research organizations, you're gonna need help from vendors that you're considering in order to make the right decision for you. My advice to you is be relentless. Engage with each vendor until all of your questions are answered. Even the best vendors may push back in certain ways, since you are going to be demanding of a lot of their time. And to some degree, you have to accept that, but you'll have to decide if their responses are adequate. And then this part, I cannot emphasize enough. You should get your hands on each product. Don't just watch videos. Don't just listen to a demo. Put your data in and run the critical analyses or whatever other operations you're trying to have supported. Does it really meet your requirements? Can you figure out how to do it? How does it feel to walk through your use case? Aside from different, of course. There's really no replacement for hands-on experience. To make kind of a silly analogy, most people wouldn't arbitrarily buy a brand new car without asking a ton of questions and test driving multiple options, sometimes the same car multiple times. Treat this with at least as much scrutiny. Lastly, I want to suggest pilot engagements. Once you've reduced the number of vendors you would consider to a few or one, see if they'll go farther than demos and trials. If there's a key set of features or functions that you need help demonstrating internally, many vendors will engage in a multi-month process where they'll work closely with you to implement those critical components. This is a way of getting, this is a relatively lower commitment approach to ensuring that you'll get the value you're looking for. So ask about it. Of course, not everyone does it, but you should ask about it. And then more generally, if a vendor doesn't support you through the evaluation process, cross them off the list. If it's not a good fit, do not contort yourself into making a big mistake. So to recapitulate, what I want you to walk away with, if nothing else, please remember that change is resisted. It's hard. Preparing your people and including them, keeping them informed, getting their buy-in and their say, really, 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 really important. Know what you need in terms of functional, business, regulatory requirements, and keep growth in mind. Know the software industry and be able to judge for yourself. I, of course, walk through a variety of ways of gaining some of that experience and some of the criteria on which you can judge vendors. And then again, get hands-on with your evaluation. I just can't stress that enough. If you aren't trying the software, knowing what it feels like, knowing what you can do and what you can't do, you do not truly understand its limitations. Thank you so much for your time today. Quick plug. If you're out there planning or looking for a data management solution, whether you're at the beginning or the end of your process, whether you're looking at LabKey products or not, we would be happy to meet with you and discuss it, truly. So get in touch with us. We'd be happy to have a conversation with you.